Enjoy the streets, Mom. That's what the millionaire said to his mother before throwing her out of the house on her birthday. But days later, he was horrified to discover something terrible. The sun rose lazily over the rooftops of the small town of Rose Valley, its golden rays caressing the facades of the houses and waking up the inhabitants to a new day. But in the majestic Smith mansion, located atop a hill overlooking the landscape, the morning light carried a special promise. It was Catherine Smith's 75th birthday, the matriarch of the family. Catherine woke up with a smile on her lips, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Despite her age, she moved with grace and vitality. Her silver hair, carefully styled, framed a face that, although marked by the passage of time, radiated warmth and undeniable kindness. She carefully chose her best dress, an elegant pastel blue ensemble that highlighted the color of her eyes. She applied a touch of makeup, something she rarely did, but today was a special day. As she looked in the mirror, she couldn't help but recall the many birthdays she had celebrated in that same house, surrounded by the love of her family. Today will be a wonderful day, she told herself. She was convinced that her only son, Michael, had something special planned. Michael, at 45, had become one of the most successful businessmen in the region. His company, Smith Constructions, was a giant in the construction sector, with projects spreading across the country. Catherine couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and nostalgia every time she thought about her son. Pride for his achievements and nostalgia for the days when he was just a little boy running through the mansion's halls, filling it with laughter and mischief. Catherine lightly descended the stairs to the main dining room. The mansion was a maze of luxury, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and antique furniture. Every corner told a story, every object was a memory of the years Catherine had spent there, first as a young wife and mother, and now as a grandmother, living under the same roof as her son. Upon reaching the dining room, Catherine suddenly stopped. The large oak table, which would normally be covered with a white linen tablecloth and the finest china on special occasions, was empty and cold. There were no flowers, no cards, not the slightest hint that anyone remembered today was a special day. Maybe they're preparing a surprise, Catherine thought, trying to keep her hope alive. She headed to the kitchen, expecting to find the staff busy with the birthday meal preparations. But the kitchen was silent and empty, with only the hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Catherine's heart sank a little more, but she refused to lose hope. Maybe Michael wants to take me out to lunch, she told herself as she made her way to her son's office. When she arrived, the door was slightly ajar, and Catherine could hear voices before entering. It was Michael and his wife, Sarah. Catherine paused, her hand just inches from the door, when she heard her name. "I can't believe your mother expects us to cancel everything for her birthday," Sarah's voice was cold and cutting. "We have a lunch with the investors, Michael, it's crucial for the new project." I know, Michael replied, his voice tired and distant. "But it's her 75th birthday. Maybe we could." "Maybe we could what?" Sarah interrupted. "Risk millions for a cake and some candles. Your mother's not a child, Michael. She should understand the world doesn't revolve around her." Catherine felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Sarah's words were like cold, sharp daggers, but what hurt the most was Michael's silence, his lack of defense. Catherine took a deep breath and gently knocked on the door before entering. "Good morning," she said with a forced smile. "I was wondering if you had any plans for today." Michael avoided her gaze, busying himself with some papers on his desk. It was Sarah who responded, her voice now sweet as honey but with a hidden edge that Catherine knew all too well. "Oh, Catherine, dear, good morning," Sarah said, stepping forward to give her a kiss on the cheek that never fully landed. "I'm afraid we have a very busy day today, an important lunch with the investors that we just can't postpone." Catherine nodded slowly, feeling her heart sink a little more with each word. "I understand," she said softly. "I just thought, well, since it's my birthday." It was then that Michael finally looked up, his eyes meeting his mother's for the first time that morning. For a moment, Catherine thought she saw a flash of guilt, perhaps even sadness, in her son's eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of cold indifference. "Mom," Michael began, his voice controlled and distant, "you know how important this lunch is. We can't cancel it. I'm sure you understand." Catherine felt the tears threaten to fall, but she refused to let them. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Of course," she whispered. "I don't want to interfere with your business, son." Sensing the tension in the air, Sarah jumped in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe we can do something small tonight, right, Michael? A cake after dinner, perhaps." But before Michael could respond, the phone on his desk rang. He answered quickly, his face transforming into a mask of concentration. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said before hanging up. He stood abruptly, grabbing his briefcase. "I'm sorry, Mom. I have to go. Something urgent came up at the office." Catherine stood motionless, watching her son prepare to leave. Every movement, every gesture of Michael's seemed to scream how insignificant she was in his life now. It was at that moment that something inside Catherine broke. Years of unconditional love, of silent sacrifices, of accepting crumbs of attention, exploded in an instant of painful clarity. "Don't bother, Michael," Catherine said, her voice trembling. "I don't need your pity or your last-minute cake." Michael stopped, surprised by his mother's tone. Sarah, on the other hand, couldn't hide a smile of satisfaction. Michael began to speak, but Catherine interrupted him. "Don't bother, Michael," Catherine repeated, her voice firmer. "I'm not a burden or an obstacle in your perfect life." The words now flowed like an unstoppable torrent. "I've spent years trying not to interfere, not to be a nuisance. I've watched you drift away slowly, watched how you let money and success change you. But no more." Michael seemed genuinely surprised by his mother's outburst. "Mom, you're overreacting," Michael began. "You know I love you, but I have responsibilities, a company to run." "And what am I, Michael? An old piece of furniture you don't know where to put?" Catherine straightened up, her small figure now imposing in her wounded dignity. "Maybe it's time for me to leave, to stop being a burden to you and your perfect wife." Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of annoyance and amusement, decided to intervene. "Catherine, dear, you're being melodramatic. No one said you were a burden." But her words, far from calming the situation, only fueled Catherine's indignation further. "You," Catherine said, turning to Sarah. "Don't you dare call me dear. I've seen how you look at me, how you whisper behind my back. You think I don't notice, but I know everything." Sarah's mask of courtesy slipped for a moment, revealing an expression of pure disdain. "So what if I do?" Sarah replied coldly. "This is my house, my life. You're just a constant reminder of Michael's past, a past he's already moved on from." Michael, caught between his wife and his mother, seemed unable to react, his eyes darting between them like he was watching a particularly violent tennis match. "Enough!" he finally exclaimed, his voice hoarse. "Both of you, enough." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Catherine recognized from his youth, when he felt particularly stressed. "Mom, you can't leave. This is your house too." But something in Michael's tone, perhaps a note of doubt or perhaps a small relief at the idea of her leaving, was the final straw for Catherine. "No, Michael," Catherine said, her voice now calm but filled with infinite sadness. "This stopped being my home a long time ago. I'll leave today." "Don't be ridiculous," Sarah snapped. "Where will you go? You have nothing outside of here." Sarah's words, though cruel, were somewhat true. Catherine had dedicated her life to her family, to that house. Outside those walls, the world seemed vast and terrifying. But at that moment, anywhere seemed preferable to staying where she was clearly not wanted. "That's my problem," Catherine replied, heading toward the door. I'll be gone before you return from your important lunch." It was then that Michael, perhaps sensing the situation slipping out of his control, or perhaps driven by the last shred of guilt he felt, made the mistake that would change everything. "Mom, wait!" he shouted, grabbing Catherine's arm with more force than necessary. "You can't just leave like this. What will people say? What will happen to my reputation if it gets out that my elderly mother is wandering the streets?" The silence that followed those words was deafening. Catherine looked at her son's face, searching for any sign of the boy he once was, of the man she had hoped he would become. But all she saw was a stranger, a man consumed by ambition and selfishness. "Let go of me, Michael," Catherine whispered. But Michael, frustrated and angry, didn't let go. Instead, in a fit of cruelty that would later haunt him, he spat the words that would definitively break the bond between mother and son. "Enjoy the streets, Mom. We don't want you here. Not today, not ever again." The impact of those words was like a slap to Catherine. She staggered back, freeing herself from Michael's grip. Sarah, for her part, couldn't contain a triumphant smile. "Michael," Catherine began, but stopped. What more could she say? Her son, the light of her life, the child for whom she had given everything, had just revealed his true feelings. Without another word, Catherine turned and walked out of the office. She walked through the halls of the mansion, halls that had witnessed so many happy moments and that now seemed to mock her with every step she took. She climbed up to her room, grabbed a small suitcase, and began packing mechanically, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Meanwhile, in the office, Michael seemed to wake up from a nightmare. "What have I done?" he murmured, staring at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. Sarah, however, showed no sign of remorse. "You did what was necessary," she said, adjusting the pearl necklace she was wearing. "It was about time to put that old woman in her place." Michael looked at her, horrified by the coldness of her words. For a moment, he saw his wife for who she really was, a beautiful woman with an empty soul, whose heart seemed to be made of ice. But before he could say anything, Sarah interrupted him. "Come on, Michael, we'll be late for the lunch. We can't keep the investors waiting." And just like that, as if in a trance, Michael allowed himself to be led out of the mansion by Sarah. The roar of the engine from their luxury car shattered the morning silence, taking with it the son who had chosen success over his mother's love. Catherine heard the car drive away from her room. With every item she packed in her suitcase, she felt a part of her life, her memories, slip away. Photos of Michael as a child, love letters from her late husband, small treasures accumulated over the years, it all now seemed to belong to another life, to another version of herself. When she finished packing, she sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was about to do. At 75, she was about to leave the only life she had ever known. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but something stronger pushed her to keep going, her dignity. "I can't stay where I'm not wanted," she whispered to herself, wiping away the last of her tears. With a deep breath, she stood up, grabbed her suitcase, and walked out of the room without looking back. Catherine slowly made her way to the front door. The mansion, which had once been a home full of life and love, now felt like a cold, empty place. Each step echoed in the sepulchral silence. Before leaving, she stopped in front of the large mirror in the foyer. The woman staring back at her seemed older and more tired than she remembered, but in her eyes, there was a spark of determination. "Happy birthday, Catherine," she told herself with a sad smile. With one last sigh, she opened the door and stepped outside into the world. The mid-morning sun greeted her with its warmth, like a comforting embrace. Catherine found herself in the gardens of the mansion, surrounded by the roses she had planted years ago. For a moment, she wondered if she was making a mistake, if she should turn back and wait for Michael to reconsider. But the memory of her son's cruel words drowned out any doubt. With slow but determined steps, Catherine began walking down the path that led to the street. Each step took her further away from the life she had known and closer to an uncertain future, but with every step, she also felt as if she was regaining something she had lost in recent years, her strength, her identity. When she reached the street, Catherine paused, unsure of where to go. The small town of Rose Valley stretched out before her, familiar and yet strangely foreign. Where could she go? Who would take her in? Then she remembered her lifelong friend, Linda. Linda lived in the town center, in a modest house that had always been a refuge for Catherine during difficult times. With a destination in mind, Catherine began walking, dragging her suitcase behind her as a constant reminder of her new reality. The walk to Linda's house was long and exhausting. People passing by looked at her with curiosity. It wasn't common to see the mother of the town's most important businessman walking alone through the streets, dragging a suitcase. Some greeted her with respect, others whispered behind her back. Catherine kept her head held high, ignoring the stares and the murmurs. After what felt like an eternity, Catherine arrived at Linda's door. With her heart pounding, she rang the bell. The seconds that followed felt like hours until finally, the door opened. Linda, a woman the same age as Catherine but with a youthful spirit that the years hadn't managed to extinguish, opened the door with a smile that quickly turned to concern when she saw the state her friend was in. "Catherine? What's happened? What are you doing here with that suitcase?" Linda asked, her voice full of worry. At the sight of her familiar and caring friend's face, Catherine felt all the emotions she had been holding back come flooding out. The tears began to fall uncontrollably. "Oh, Linda," Catherine sobbed, "something terrible has happened." Without saying another word, Linda enveloped Catherine in a comforting embrace and led her inside the house. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world that had been so cruel to Catherine on her special day. Inside Linda's cozy living room, Catherine collapsed into a chair, her body trembling from the suppressed sobs. Linda sat beside her, holding her hands and patiently waiting for her friend to calm down enough to speak. "Take a deep breath, dear," Linda said softly. "You're safe here. Tell me what happened." Little by little, between tears and broken sighs, Catherine began to recount the events of the morning. She told Linda about the cold reception on her birthday, the cruel words from Sarah, and finally, the painful betrayal from Michael. Linda listened in silence, her face reflecting a mixture of shock, sadness, and growing indignation. When Catherine finished her story, Linda hugged her tightly, this time even stronger. "Oh, Catherine," Linda said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I'm so sorry. I can't believe Michael did something like that. That's not the son you raised." Catherine nodded weakly. "I don't recognize my son, Linda. It's like money and power have turned him into someone completely different." Linda stood up suddenly, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You'll stay here with me for as long as you need. I won't let you spend your birthday alone and sad." Catherine tried to protest, not wanting to be a burden, but Linda silenced her with a firm look. "Not another word about that. You're my best friend, Catherine. Your place is here, with me." For the first time since leaving the mansion, Catherine felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, after all, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Linda disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a tray. On it were 2 steaming cups of tea and a small cake with a lit candle. "It's not much," Linda said with a shy smile, "but we can't let your birthday pass without at least a little celebration." Catherine looked at the cake, then at her friend, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. The tears came back to her eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy and thankfulness. "Linda, I don't know what to say," Catherine murmured. "You don't have to say anything," Linda responded. "Just blow out the candle and make a wish." Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened that day. When she opened them, there was a new resolve in her eyes. She blew out the candle with determination, as if, in that act, she was also blowing away all her troubles and sorrows. What did you wish for? Linda asked with a smile. Catherine looked at her friend and, for the first time all day, smiled genuinely. I wished for the strength to start again, she said, to show Michael and everyone that I still have so much to offer. Linda nodded, approving with a look of pride. And you will, dear. You will. As they shared the cake and tea, Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Yes, she had lost much that day, but she had also gained something invaluable, the freedom to be herself, without living under the shadow of others' expectations. What Catherine didn't know at that moment was that her birthday wish was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the life she had left behind. Her quest for a new beginning would soon intertwine with dark secrets, unexpected betrayals, and a twist of fate that no one could have foreseen. Catherine walked slowly towards the front door. The mansion, once filled with life and love, now felt like a cold and empty place. Every step echoed in the eerie silence. Before stepping outside, she stopped in front of the large mirror in the foyer. The woman looking back at her seemed older and more tired than she remembered, but a spark of determination still flickered in her eyes. Happy birthday, Catherine, she whispered to herself with a sad smile. With one final sigh, she opened the door and stepped out into the world. The late morning sun greeted her with warmth, like a comforting embrace. Catherine found herself in the mansion's gardens, surrounded by the roses she had planted years ago. For a brief moment, she wondered if she was making a mistake, if she should turn back and wait for Michael to change his mind. But the memory of her son's cruel words drowned out any lingering doubt. With slow but determined steps, Catherine began walking down the path that led to the street. Every step took her further away from the life she had known and closer to an uncertain future, but with each step, she also felt as if she were reclaiming something she had lost over the years, her strength, her identity. When she reached the street, Catherine paused, uncertain of where to go. The small town of Rose Valley stretched out before her, familiar yet strangely foreign. Where could she go? Who would take her in? Then she remembered her lifelong friend, Linda. Linda lived in the town center, in a modest house that had always been a refuge for Catherine during difficult times. With a destination in mind, Catherine began walking again, dragging her suitcase behind her like a constant reminder of her new reality. The walk to Linda's house was long and exhausting. People passing by looked at her with curiosity. It wasn't common to see the mother of the town's wealthiest businessman walking alone, pulling a suitcase. Some greeted her with respect, while others whispered behind her back. Catherine held her head high, ignoring the stares and the murmurs. After what felt like an eternity, Catherine finally arrived at Linda's door. With her heart pounding, she rang the bell. The seconds that followed felt like hours until the door opened at last. Linda, a woman of Catherine's age but with a youthful spirit that hadn't been dulled by the years, opened the door with a smile that quickly turned to concern when she saw the state her friend was in. Catherine? What's happened? What are you doing here with that suitcase? Linda asked, her voice filled with worry. At the sight of her friend's familiar, caring face, all the emotions Catherine had been holding back came rushing to the surface. Tears began to fall uncontrollably. Oh, Linda, Catherine sobbed, something terrible has happened. Without saying another word, Linda wrapped Catherine in a comforting hug and led her inside the house. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world that had been so cruel to Catherine on her special day. Inside Linda's cozy living room, Catherine collapsed into a chair, her body shaking from the sobs she could no longer hold back. Linda sat next to her, holding her hands and waiting patiently for her friend to calm down enough to speak. Take a deep breath, dear, Linda said softly. You're safe here. Tell me what happened. Little by little, between sobs and broken sighs, Catherine began to recount the events of the morning. She told Linda about the cold reception she received on her birthday, the cruel words from Sarah, and finally, the heartbreaking betrayal from Michael. Linda listened quietly, her face a mixture of shock, sadness, and growing anger. When Catherine finished her story, Linda hugged her tightly, even stronger this time. "Oh, Catherine," Linda said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I'm so sorry. I can't believe Michael would do something like that. That's not the son you raised." Catherine nodded weakly. "I don't recognize him anymore, Linda. It's as if the money and power have turned him into a completely different person." Linda stood up suddenly, a determined glint in her eyes. "Well, you don't have to worry about him anymore. You're staying here with me as long as you need to. I won't let you spend your birthday alone and sad." Catherine tried to protest, not wanting to be a burden, but Linda silenced her with a firm look. "Not another word about that. You're my best friend, Catherine. Your place is here, with me." For the first time since she left the mansion, Catherine felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, after all, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Linda disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a tray. On it were 2 steaming cups of tea and a small cake with a lit candle. "It's not much," Linda said with a shy smile, "but we can't let your birthday pass without at least a small celebration." Catherine looked at the cake, then at her friend, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. The tears came again, but this time they were tears of joy and appreciation. "Linda, I don't know what to say," Catherine murmured. "You don't have to say anything," Linda replied. "Just blow out the candle and make a wish." Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened that day. When she opened them again, there was a new resolve in her gaze. She blew out the candle with a strong breath, as if she were blowing away all her pain and sorrow. "What did you wish for?" Linda asked with a smile. Catherine looked at her friend and, for the first time all day, smiled genuinely. "I wished for the strength to start over," she said, "to prove to Michael and everyone else that I still have so much to offer." Linda nodded approvingly, a look of pride in her eyes. As they shared the cake and tea, Catherine felt the heavy burden on her shoulders begin to lift. Yes, she had lost a great deal that day, but she had also gained something invaluable, the freedom to be herself, without living under the expectations of others. What Catherine didn't know at that moment was that her birthday wish would soon set off a series of events that would shake the foundations of the life she had left behind. Her quest for a new beginning would soon intertwine with dark secrets, unexpected betrayals, and a twist of fate that no one could have predicted. Catherine walked slowly along the path that led back to the street, her steps lighter now as she let go of the past and embraced the future, uncertain as it was. The sun's warmth on her face felt like a gentle reminder that, despite everything, life moved forward, and so would she. The weight of all that had transpired today was still there, but alongside it, there was a newfound strength, a determination that burned quietly inside her. She left Linda's house later that afternoon with plans to return in the evening. The 2 friends had spent hours reminiscing about their youth, sharing laughter and tears. It was the first time in years that Catherine had felt truly seen and valued, without the shadow of expectations looming over her. As she walked back through the now quiet streets of Rose Valley, her thoughts lingered on the conversation she and Linda had shared. It had been so long since anyone had taken the time to ask her how she felt, what she wanted, or even who she was outside of being Michael's mother. That night, as she lay in the guest room of Linda's modest home, Catherine found herself reflecting on her life, her choices, and the people who had shaped her. Her husband, John, had been a good man, a loving father, but he, too, had placed enormous weight on her shoulders, expecting her to uphold the family's reputation, to always present a picture of elegance and composure. And then there was Michael, the son she had loved more than life itself, whose coldness had shattered her today. How had things gone so wrong? When had she lost her place in her own life? The answer didn't come immediately, but as Catherine lay in the darkness, the pieces began to fall into place. She realized that, for years, she had sacrificed her own desires and dreams for the sake of others, constantly putting herself last. Her life had revolved around her family, and now that they had pushed her away, she was left to rediscover who she truly was. The following days were quiet, peaceful even, as Catherine began to settle into a new routine at Linda's. It wasn't the grand mansion she had been accustomed to, but the warmth and love in Linda's small home more than made up for what it lacked in luxury. Slowly, Catherine began to rediscover the small joys in life, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the sound of birds singing outside the window, and the feeling of freedom that came from not having to meet anyone's expectations. It wasn't long before word of Catherine's departure from the mansion spread throughout the town. Some whispered behind her back, others pitied her, but a few admired her courage for walking away from a life of wealth and privilege. Among the latter was a young woman named Emily, a single mother who worked at a local bakery. Emily had heard about Catherine's story and saw in her an inspiring figure, someone who had chosen dignity over material wealth. One day, as Catherine strolled through the market square, Emily approached her nervously. "Mrs. Smith?" she asked, her voice tentative but hopeful. Catherine turned to see the young woman standing before her, her eyes filled with admiration. "Yes, dear." Catherine responded with a kind smile. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've heard about what happened with your son, and I just wanted to say, you're really brave," Emily said, her voice soft but sincere. "I don't know if I'd have the strength to do what you did." Catherine was taken aback for a moment. Brave? She hadn't felt brave at all. She had felt broken, humiliated, and lost. But as she looked at Emily, she realized that perhaps there was some truth in her words. It took courage to walk away from a life that no longer served her, to choose herself after years of self-neglect. "Thank you, dear," Catherine said, her smile growing warmer. "But it wasn't easy, I can assure you." Emily nodded, her eyes bright with admiration. "I just wanted you to know that what you did, it means something. To people like me, anyway." Catherine felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much her decision had resonated with others, especially younger women like Emily. For so long, she had been living in the shadow of other people's expectations, and now, in her quiet rebellion, she had unknowingly become a symbol of strength and independence. As Emily walked away, Catherine stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just been said. Maybe this was the new beginning she had wished for, not just for herself, but for others who had been watching her all along. For the first time in a long while, Catherine felt a sense of purpose stirring inside her. Days turned into weeks, and Catherine's life at Linda's began to take on a new rhythm. She no longer felt the sting of being cast out from her family. Instead, she focused on rebuilding herself, day by day. She joined Linda at the local community center, helping with activities for the elderly, offering a listening ear, and sharing her own experiences. Catherine found solace in the stories of others who had faced their own struggles, and in turn, she began to heal from the wounds Michael's betrayal had inflicted. Then, one afternoon, as Catherine sat in the sunlit garden behind Linda's house, a letter arrived. The familiar handwriting on the envelope made her heart skip a beat. It was from Michael. With trembling hands, Catherine opened the letter and began to read. Michael's words were full of regret and sorrow. He apologized for his cruelty, for letting his ambition blind him to what truly mattered. He admitted that he had been wrong and asked for her forgiveness, though he wasn't sure he deserved it. He begged her to come back, to be a part of his life once more. Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes as she read the letter. For so long, she had dreamed of hearing these words from her son, of mending the bond that had been broken. But now that the apology was here, she found herself feeling conflicted. Would returning to the mansion mean returning to the life she had fought so hard to leave behind? Would Michael truly have changed, or was this just another attempt to pull her back into the world she no longer belonged to? Catherine folded the letter and placed it on the table beside her. The sun continued to warm her face as she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of her decision ahead. 4-0. Catherine sat in the garden for a long while, the letter from Michael resting on the table beside her like an unopened door to her past. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the flowers and trees that surrounded Linda's home. The quiet peace of the moment felt at odds with the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Michael's apology, something she had once longed for, was now bittersweet. She had spent weeks rebuilding her sense of self, finding solace in her new life. Yet, here was her son, extending an olive branch. Should she take it? Could she trust that he had truly changed, or was this just another fleeting moment of guilt, one that would pass as soon as his business demands returned? As Catherine pondered her decision, Linda stepped outside, holding 2 cups of tea. She placed one gently in front of Catherine and took a seat beside her, sensing the weight of the letter before Catherine even mentioned it. "Michael?" Linda asked quietly, nodding toward the folded paper. Catherine nodded, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "He's apologizing. He says he's sorry for everything, for how he treated me. He wants me to come back." Linda sipped her tea thoughtfully, her expression calm but concerned. "And what do you want to do, Catherine?" Catherine's heart felt heavy with indecision. "I don't know. Part of me wants to forgive him, to believe that he's changed. But another part of me is afraid that nothing will really be different, that I'll go back to being invisible in that house." Linda placed her hand gently over Catherine's. "You've come a long way, my dear. You've rediscovered who you are outside of Michael's world. Whatever you decide, just make sure it's what's best for you, not out of obligation or guilt." Catherine nodded slowly, her mind still racing with thoughts of what could be. She had spent so many years shaping her life around Michael, making sacrifices for him, and being his constant support. But in the past few weeks, she had begun to find her own strength, her own voice. Going back to him, even with his apology, felt like stepping back into the shadows of her former self. As the days passed, Catherine continued to think about Michael's letter. She knew that the love she had for her son was unconditional, and in her heart, she had already forgiven him. But forgiveness didn't mean she had to return to the life she had left behind. It didn't mean sacrificing her newfound sense of independence and freedom. After all, she had finally learned to live for herself. One morning, Catherine made her decision. She sat down at Linda's kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and a pen, ready to write her response to Michael. She took a deep breath and began to write, her words flowing with clarity and purpose. "Dear Michael, I have received your letter, and I want to thank you for your heartfelt apology. It means more to me than you know, to hear that you recognize the pain that was caused and to know that you feel remorse. As your mother, I have always loved you and always will, and I have already forgiven you in my heart. However, I have also learned something important in these past few weeks. I have found myself again. For so long, I lived for others, always putting your needs above my own. But now I see that I have my own needs, my own dreams, and my own sense of self that I cannot sacrifice anymore. I want you to know that I will always be here for you, but I will not be returning to the mansion. My life is no longer there, nor do I believe it is the best place for me anymore. I hope you can understand and respect this decision, as I believe it is the healthiest path forward for both of us. Take care of yourself, Michael. I hope that we can continue to build our relationship in a way that honors us both. With love, Mom." Catherine folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a sense of finality. It wasn't the ending she had once imagined, but it was the right one. She had chosen herself, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. That afternoon, she walked to the post office, the sun warm on her face as she carried the letter in her hand. As she dropped it into the mailbox, a sense of peace washed over her. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where Catherine was free to live her life on her own terms. As the weeks turned into months, Catherine continued to grow in her newfound freedom. She and Michael exchanged occasional letters, slowly mending their relationship from a distance. But Catherine never looked back with regret. She had found her strength, her independence, and in doing so, she had rediscovered the woman she had always been but had forgotten for so long. Catherine's life, though different from what it had once been, was rich with the small joys she had once overlooked. She spent time with Linda, helped in the community, and even began volunteering at the local library, sharing her love of books and stories with the children who visited. In those quiet moments, surrounded by laughter and warmth, Catherine knew she had made the right choice. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, not because of anyone else, but because she had found herself again. And that, Catherine realized, was the greatest gift she could have ever given herself. As the seasons changed, so did Catherine's life. The peaceful rhythm she had found at Linda's house continued to fill her days with quiet joy. Each morning, she woke with a sense of purpose, unburdened by the expectations of others. Her newfound independence brought her closer to the life she had always longed for, even if it had taken her years to realize it. One particularly crisp autumn morning, Catherine decided to take a walk through the town. The air was cool, the leaves on the trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the streets of Rose Valley bustled with activity as people prepared for the upcoming holidays. Catherine found herself strolling through the market, breathing in the fresh air, feeling more alive and content than she had in a long time. As she wandered through the town, she was greeted warmly by familiar faces. People no longer whispered about her behind her back, instead, they admired the grace with which she had embraced her new life. Even Emily, the young woman from the bakery, often waved at her as she passed by, a constant reminder that Catherine's story had quietly inspired others. Later that day, as Catherine returned to Linda's home, she found a small envelope waiting for her in the mailbox. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Michael's handwriting on the front. She had expected that her letter would stir emotions in him, but she hadn't anticipated another response so soon. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, Catherine carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Dear Mom. Thank you for your letter. I cannot begin to express how much your words meant to me. I have spent the last few weeks reflecting on everything you said, and I understand now that I was asking you to return to a life that wasn't truly yours anymore. I was selfish in wanting you back without considering how much you've changed and grown, and how important your newfound independence is to you. I respect your decision not to come back to the mansion, and though it saddens me, I know it's for the best. I've also come to realize that I need to change, too. You were right all along, I let my ambition blind me to the things that truly matter, and I lost sight of the love and care that you always gave me. I'm working on becoming the person I should have been, not just for you, but for myself. I hope we can continue to rebuild our relationship, even if it's different from what it was before. I want to get to know you again, not just as my mother, but as the strong, independent woman you've become. With love and gratitude, Michael. Catherine felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she read Michael's words. For the first time, she sensed that his apology was not just a fleeting moment of guilt but a genuine acknowledgement of his mistakes and a desire for change. It was a beginning, perhaps not the one she had once envisioned, but one that offered hope for a future where they could both grow, separately, yet together in a new way. She folded the letter with a soft smile, feeling lighter. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it didn't need to be. She had let go of the need for perfection a long time ago. What mattered now was that both she and Michael were learning to move forward, each on their own path. That evening, as Catherine sat with Linda by the fire, sipping tea and chatting about the day, she shared Michael's letter with her. Linda listened quietly, her eyes warm with understanding. You've both come a long way, Linda said after Catherine finished reading. It's never easy to change, but it sounds like Michael is starting to understand what truly matters. Catherine nodded, gazing into the flames of the fire. Yes, he is. And I think I am, too. I've spent so much of my life living for others, but now, I finally feel like I'm living for myself. And I think that's what Michael needs to learn as well, how to find his own balance, his own happiness, without relying on the approval of others. Linda smiled and raised her teacup in a small toast. To new beginnings, Catherine. For both of you. Catherine raised her cup as well, her heart full of gratitude for the journey she had taken. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them, not as the woman she once was, but as the woman she had become. The days continued to pass, each one filled with small moments of joy and contentment. Catherine continued her volunteer work at the community center and the library, finding purpose in helping others. She and Michael wrote letters to each other regularly, slowly rebuilding their relationship, one step at a time. As the holidays approached, Michael extended an invitation for Catherine to join him for Christmas. It was a simple gathering, he promised, just the two of them, without the pressures of grandeur or expectation. Catherine hesitated at first, uncertain whether she was ready to return to the mansion, even for a brief visit. But in the end, she decided to go. Not because she was returning to her old life, but because she was meeting her son on new terms, as equals, with a fresh understanding of each other. When she arrived at the mansion on Christmas Eve, it was a quiet, intimate affair. The grand halls were still there, but the air felt lighter, less burdened by the weight of appearances. Michael greeted her with genuine warmth, and for the first time in years, they sat together as mother and son, not bound by expectations but by mutual respect and love. As they shared a simple meal, Catherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had come full circle, but this time, it was different. She had found her place, not just in Michael's life but in her own. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift of all. Later that night, as Catherine walked through the mansion's rose garden, now bare from the winter cold, she breathed in the crisp night air and smiled. The journey had been long and painful at times, but it had also been transformative. She was no longer the woman who had once felt lost in the shadows of others. She had found her strength, her voice, and most importantly, her own sense of self. And with that, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it with courage, grace, and a heart full of hope. The stars twinkled above her as she made her way back inside, where the warmth of the fire and the love of her son awaited her. It was a new beginning, for both of them. And for Catherine, that was enough. Catherine walked back inside the mansion, her heart light despite the crisp winter chill that had filled the night air. As she stepped through the familiar halls, she marveled at how different everything felt. The weight that had once burdened her here was gone. She had reclaimed her sense of self, and though this place had once been a source of pain, it no longer held that power over her. The mansion, like her relationship with Michael, was a part of her past, but not her future. Inside, Michael sat by the fire, a thoughtful expression on his face as he looked up at his mother's return. His eyes reflected the humility and regret of a man who had come to terms with his mistakes, and though their relationship was still healing, there was now a foundation of mutual understanding between them. "Thank you for coming tonight, Mom," Michael said softly, standing to meet her. "I know it wasn't easy for you." Catherine smiled gently, placing a hand on her son's arm. "It was something we both needed, Michael. I wanted to come, not just for you, but for myself too." They sat together for a while in silence, the warmth of the fire comforting them both. For the first time in years, their silence wasn't strained. It was peaceful, filled with an unspoken acknowledgement that things were finally beginning to heal. After a time, Michael spoke again, his voice filled with quiet sincerity. "I'm going to change, Mom. I know I've said it before, but this time, I truly mean it. I want to be the kind of son you deserve. Someone who values the important things in life, not just success and wealth." Catherine looked at him, her heart filled with both hope and acceptance. "I know, Michael. But the change has to be for you, not just for me. You're on your own journey, and I'll be here to support you, but we both need to keep moving forward, in our own ways." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that now." Later that night, as Catherine prepared to leave, she and Michael stood at the front door, the quiet stillness of the night surrounding them. The stars twinkled brightly in the sky, and the snow-covered garden glistened under the moonlight. "Mom," Michael said, his voice soft, "I hope we can keep rebuilding this, our relationship. I don't want to lose you again. Catherine smiled warmly, a feeling of peace settling over her. We will, Michael. We already are. But remember, it's not about going back to how things were. It's about moving forward, together, in a new way. Michael hugged his mother tightly, and for the first time in a long time, it felt genuine, not an obligation or a formality, but a gesture filled with love and understanding. As Catherine stepped out into the cold night, she felt a deep sense of closure. She had made peace with her past, with her son, and most importantly, with herself. The road ahead was uncertain, but she no longer feared it. She had found her strength, her independence, and her place in the world. Walking back toward Linda's house, Catherine breathed in the fresh night air, her heart full. The journey had been long, painful, and transformative, but it had led her here, to a life where she was free to be herself, unburdened by others' expectations. And as the stars twinkled above her, Catherine smiled, knowing that the future, whatever it held, would be hers to shape. The end.